They posted a $500 violation notice on Ellis's door on the morning of his grandson's homecoming from overseas deployment. No warning, just the fine flapping in the wind. Name's Braden Fox. I live 2 houses down, used to work systems for Lockheed, now I mostly read property law and drink lukewarm coffee. That day, I happened to be holding a folded land survey from 1994, and they didn't even glance at it. Ever seen someone push the wrong man on the right day? 2 moving trucks rolled into Ellis Greaves's driveway at 7:03 a.m. Sharp. Not a minute later, one of them started reversing toward his garage with the beep, beep, beep of a machine, certain of its permission. But nobody had asked him. Not Patrice, not the HOA, not a single soul. From across the street, I sipped my coffee and watched it happen like a scene already in progress. The drivers hopped out adjusting caps and gloves and began unlatching the truck's rear door. A stack of beige crates, plastic-wrapped and official-looking, sat waiting like obedient dogs. Ellis stood at the edge of his lawn, arms folded, his shadow long across the sun-scorched sidewalk. His face, carved by years of welding and stubborn machinery, didn't twitch. He just stared. Patrice Calhoun, mid-50s, visor tight on her crown like a helmet of authority, strode forward, clipboard in hand. She pointed with a pencil as if marking coordinates on a map. "This was approved under Clause 73F, she announced. Her voice sliced through the morning like a weed trimmer. She didn't look at Ellis. She looked past him. Ellis glanced down at her clipboard, then back at the garage. Then, finally, at me. "Still got that old train lock in the shed?" he asked, like he was asking about a shovel. I nodded. "I think so." He didn't curse, didn't shout, just turned around and walked. I followed him across the backyard, past the faded wind chimes, and down the gravel path toward the metal shed he kept locked with a simple twist latch. Inside, the air smelled like dry rubber and copper. Old tools hung like relics. And there it was, the lock. It was heavier than I remembered, thick iron shaped like a clenched jaw. Rust danced along its edges. Ellis held it with both hands, then retrieved a matching chain curled like a sleeping snake on the shelf. "Used this on a locomotive door once," he murmured. "Storm out of Lubbock." Wind tried to rip the car open sideways. I didn't ask why he'd kept it. Some men carry pasts the way others carry pensions. We walked back. The delivery men were now inside the garage, stacking crates against the back wall. Patrice stood with her arms on her hips like a queen surveying her empire. Ellis didn't say a word. Just walked up, waited until one of the men stepped out for a smoke break, and without fanfare threaded the chain through both garage handles. The lock clicked shut like a final period in an argument no one realized they were losing. That's when Patrice noticed. She spun around, lips parting in disbelief. "You can't just— You're obstructing a community function." Ellis, cool as winter bark, replied. "This isn't a community building. This is an approved structure. Clause 73F clearly states." He raised one hand, not to silence her, just to pause the moment. Then he took out his phone and dialed. "Yes, hello? I'd like to report an unauthorized entry into a private garage. No weapons, no threats. Just a civil misunderstanding and some people putting things where they don't belong." Patrice fumed. "You're calling the police on your own, HOA." "Didn't know we had one anymore," he said, and sat down in a folding lawn chair he'd dragged from the porch. He positioned it just so, right beside the chained garage door. Then he folded his hands over his belly and stared straight ahead. Still, silent. The early sunlight caught on the rust of the lock like it was something holy. I stood there too unsure whether to laugh or salute. One of the delivery men asked if they should do anything. Ellis didn't answer, just sat. When the dispatcher confirmed an officer was en route, I saw him nod once the way a man does when something invisible clicks into place, and still he didn't say another word. The neighborhood, always eager for excitement, began to stir. Curtains moved. A camera phone poked out behind a hanging fern. The birds hadn't returned to chirping yet. Maybe they knew better. I looked down at the lock. Heavy, unsmiling, weathered. Same as the man who'd just shut an entire argument with it. And just like that, Ellis Greaves, a man of few words and fewer indulgences, sat vigil beside his locked garage, guarding not just a building, but something deeper: the right to be asked, the right to say no. The next morning, a bright yellow notice flapped like a wounded flag on Ellis's front door. "Violation," it screamed in bold red letters. Below that, in almost cheerful font, $500 fine, garage obstruction, Rule 44B. I stared at it from the sidewalk, coffee in hand, as if the ink might start crawling off the page. Rule 44B. I'd been a resident of Carindale Crossing for nearly 2 decades, sat through more HOA meetings than anyone with a pulse should have to. There was no Rule 44B. Ellis didn't even touch the notice at first. He stepped onto the porch, read it once, then turned back inside. No comment. No curse. Just the quiet click of the storm door closing behind him. By 10 a.m., half the cul-de-sac had taken a lap past Ellis's driveway. Some just happened to walk their dogs. Others pushed empty strollers with no children in sight. People talk with their eyes when their mouths don't dare move. Patrice Calhoun strolled by around 11, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched high like a crown. She tapped a few notes while standing at the edge of Ellis's lawn, not crossing over but daring the grass to challenge her. Her assistant trailed behind Lorelei Dean, the 20-something, with sharp shoulders and eyes that flicked everywhere but yours. When she passed my driveway, I raised a hand. "Morning." She flinched, then offered a weak wave before quickly looking down at the stack of papers in her arms. A flash of something unease guilt briefly cracked her composure. That afternoon, I went digging. The HOA documents previously mailed to all residents in a thick binder of bureaucratic sleep aids were still in my hall closet. I found the index page flipped to the Rules and Enforcement section. No Rule 44B, no clauses numbered past 39, actually. I ran a keyword search through the digital copy, too. Still nothing. By dusk, Ellis had removed the notice without ceremony. He folded it once, then again, and slid it under a coaster on the porch table like a note you don't burn just yet. Later, I caught Lorelei looping around the neighborhood alone, clipboard still clutched tight. She walked up to Ellis's front yard and pretended to admire the hedges, but when she turned to leave, something slipped. It was fast, just a small bump against her hip, but enough to send the clipboard tumbling. I jogged over, bent down to hand it back, and caught a glimpse of the top page temporary enforcement orders. HOA, Continuation Team. The words were typed in a mismatched font with inconsistent spacing, like someone had stitched them together using bits from other documents. She snatched it quickly, cheeks flaring red, muttered a thank you, and sped off like a dog, realizing it was on the wrong porch. I didn't chase, but I didn't forget either. That evening, Ellis appeared on his porch with a slab of sanded oak under one arm and a bucket of screws under the other. He spent 20 minutes installing it on a wooden post planted cleanly beside the garage door. The sign read, "Private Property. No exceptions," in tall, dark serif. Nothing fancy. Nothing weak. Neighbors paused on their walks. Some nodded subtly. Others looked away, suddenly fascinated by their shoelaces. But the message stood. Idella March, who lived 2 houses down and spoke maybe twice a month, stood behind her screen door for a good 20 minutes, just watching. She didn't take notes. She didn't blink much either. Some people don't need to say anything to say everything. Just before midnight, I peeked out my window one last time, checking if the heat had finally broken. That's when I saw it. A gray sedan parked 1 block down, engine off, lights out. Inside, I could just make out the silhouette of Lorelei sitting perfectly still, eyes fixed on Ellis's house. She wasn't holding a clipboard. She wasn't making a call. She was just watching. And from the way her hands stayed clenched in her lap, it looked like she wasn't sure whose side she was supposed to be on anymore. Ellis never rushed. Even when the town was on fire metaphorically and nearly once literally, the man moved like a glacier deciding whether to shift. That morning, he emerged from his bedroom holding a rectangular metal box, the kind made to survive fires, floods, and questionable relatives. He placed it on the kitchen table like a priest laying down scripture. The latch clicked open with a dry snap. Inside were paper plats so old the edges had curled inward like sleeping fingers. He pulled one out, a land survey hand-signed in 1994. Below it, a faded photo Ellis, 25 years younger, standing in front of the same garage holding a wrench and wearing the stubborn pride of a man who'd built something from sweat and grit. This garage, he said, tapping the photo, was never community anything. It was mine when I poured the slab. It was mine when they asked me to join their little board. It's mine now. I leaned in. The plat map showed it clearly. Ellis's lot line extended 2 feet beyond the garage wall. There was no easement, no shared use clause, just boundary ink and time. "Weldon'll want to see this," he said. We met Weldon Pierce at the town diner just before lunch, easier to avoid attention that way. Weldon still wore collared shirts tucked into belted slacks, still carried a leather-bound notebook like a badge of honor. He greeted Ellis like a man greeting the last tree left standing after a storm. "Let's see what we're fighting," Weldon said, laying out his reading glasses. He examined the plat, slowly fingers tracing surveyor notations like Braille. Then he nodded. "This is solid. No question. Your title's clean, the structure's covered. Patrice doesn't have a legal foot to stand on." Weldon flipped through his notebook. And more to the point, the Carindale HOA was formally dissolved in 2021. Disbanded. I processed the paperwork myself. I blinked. Dissolved. Then what are all these rules? He shrugged. Leftovers. Ghosts. Nobody's filed reinstatement, and without a board you can't enforce squat. The bell over the diner door jingled. Lorelei Dean stepped in face pale. Makeup minimal. She headed to the counter but froze halfway as she spotted us. Weldon, calm as ever, sipped his coffee and continued. They'd need a rechartering vote, new filings with the Secretary of State. I checked. Nothing. Patrice is running a clubhouse with no charter. A cup shattered. Lorelei had dropped her coffee and with it her plastic name badge. It skidded under the table, landing face up, HOA, Interim Authority. L. Dean. She crouched to retrieve it, face flushed, but her hands trembled. Weldon pretended not to notice. Ellis did the same. I met her eyes. She knew. Whatever script she'd been handed was unraveling. Weldon stood buttoning his shirt like the meeting was over. "I'll send you something he said to me. Use it wisely." Back home, I waited. And that evening the email arrived, an encrypted message labeled Carindale HOA Dissolution. Final copy, 2021. It bore 3 digital signatures and a scanned county seal. I didn't forward it. Not yet. I stared at the photo Ellis had shown me earlier, now framed on his mantel. Him and that wrench, same garage, same silent pride. Some truths you don't argue. You just show the paper. Later that night, long after the town fell quiet, my phone buzzed. No name, no number, just a single line. "She's using personal accounts." Lorelei showed up at my house just past 6. No clipboard, no badge. Her blouse was wrinkled, her mascara gone or never worn. She held a manila folder close to her chest like a life jacket. "I can't go to the police," she said, standing awkwardly on the porch. "But I can come to you." I let her in without asking. The cicadas were in full choir by then, and Ellis had already brewed a second pot of coffee for the evening. We sat on his screened porch while the sky burned down into the long gold of late August. She didn't sit at first, just stood by the edge of the table, eyes bouncing from the floorboards to Ellis's unchanging face to my hands, which were folded waiting. "I didn't know at first," she said. "I thought it was temporary. Then I saw the way she talked to contractors. It wasn't community work, it was always favors." I nodded slowly. "The guy who restriped the tennis court." She flinched. "He's been repainting code violation signs for years. Under the table. Cash." Ellis said nothing. Just pushed a yellow highlighter across the table. Lorelei opened the folder. The first page was a bank statement. The account holder, Patrice Calhoun. Over $68,000 in deposits labeled HOA Contrib. Or late fees. Some with dates after the HOA's official dissolution in 2021. She laid out receipts, deposit slips, even screenshots of text messages, one with Patrice's name clipped at the top instructing her to process 3 payments from residents, then forward the totals to an account ending in 0499. I asked about the account once Lorelei said voice shaking. She said it was for operational continuity. But it was her account. I checked. Ellis leaned in, highlighting 3 dates in a row, August 3rd, 10th, 17th, each with deposits between $900 and $1,200. That's not dues, he said flatly. That's extraction. I opened my laptop. Weldon had already confirmed there was no legal pathway for collecting HOA fees without a charter. The documents he sent last week sat in a folder named HOA Fraud Watch, buried between files from my last contract gig and my divorce lawyer's final invoice. As I cross-referenced the deposits with resident payment histories, the pattern formed fast. 10 households, all recently cited for violations, had made payments directly to the same personal account. Not to a bank under HOA registry. Not to escrow. Direct to Patrice. Lorelei looked like she hadn't slept in days. She has pictures of my mom, old tax records. Said if I ever left, she can't use that, I said sharper than I meant to. She sat down, then, finally her shoulders folding in on themselves. I clicked New Report. The FBI's white-collar tip-line portal wasn't fancy just boxes, drop-downs, and upload prompts. I attached the dissolution letter, then the statements, then the memo from Weldon, then Lorelei's folder scanned page by page. Ellis watched me silently, his hand resting near the train lock, still resting on the table, like a relic. Not used since that first morning. Not touched. Ready, I asked. He didn't move. So I hit send. The screen blinked. Thank you. Your report has been submitted. No fireworks, no confirmation call. Just the quiet weight of something irreversible. As we sat in that breathless stillness, Lorelei looked up and whispered, "You don't know the half of it. She's planning something." I blinked. "What?" "For the fall harvest fair," she said. "Something big. Something permanent." Ellis finally spoke. "Then we'd better finish before the hay bales go up." Ellis didn't go to the HOA town hall meeting that night. He didn't even mention it. Just brewed his dark roast at 6:30, sharpened 2 yellow pencils, and slid his glasses down the ridge of his nose like a man preparing for war, not with fists, but footnotes. By 7:04 p.m., the folding chairs at Carindale Crossings Community Center were creaking under the weight of fanned tempers and paper agendas. But we weren't there. We were in my living room, surrounded by piles of printed emails, financial statements, land plats, bylaws, and a growing sense that if this wasn't criminal, it was damn close. Ellis sat cross-legged on my old couch, stacks of invoices balanced neatly beside him. I sat at the desk, my fingers dancing over the keys. Clause 12A was repealed in 2018, he said, circling a footnote with his pencil. "Got it," I replied, copy-pasting the PDF line into the report. Page 43. Of 84. The FBI form wasn't complex, but thorough. Every claim required documentation. Every detail had to be supported. And every minute we worked, I could feel something shifting, like the moment before a thunderstorm, where the humidity builds and builds, but refuses to break. At 8:16, there was a soft knock on Ellis's front door. 3 short taps, then silence. He rose without speaking. When he came back, he held an envelope, unmarked except for a line of blocky cursive across the front from one of the quiet ones. Inside were 3 HOA invoices dated 2022, each issued after the HOA had already been legally dissolved. One even bore Patrice's actual signature, thick red ink, underlined twice. There was a tea stain in the corner, like someone had read it more than once. Ellis laid them beside the dissolution letter from Weldon. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." We resumed work. By 9:40, Lorelei was on speakerphone from her apartment across town. Her voice was steadier than last time, but still carried a brittle edge like glass cooling too fast. She used my uncle's PayPal account, she admitted. to take payments from the 4 houses on Lotus Lane. Said it was temporary housing assessments. But I traced the transfers. They all landed in the same personal checking account, hers. Ellis looked at me. Put it in the summary. New paragraph. I typed until the keyboard felt warm. Then I saved. Reread again. Finally, I opened the portal, the secure FBI complaint site. I uploaded the scanned dissolution doc, then the invoices, then the screenshots of transfers, clipped emails, receipts, even the blurry photo of the violation notice tacked to Ellis's door. Ellis didn't ask me to double-check, he just watched. And I clicked submit. The room didn't react. No pings, no fireworks, just a dull click of a mouse and the faint hum of the fridge kicking on. Now we wait, I muttered. Ellis nodded, slid the invoices into a fresh manila folder, and stood. The next morning, the flyers showed up. Printed in bold, Arial double-sided, slipped under doormats and wedged into porch railings. At the top is your neighborhood safe underneath Carindale residents be alert. A known agitator has been reported for civil disruption, property obstruction, and potential threats to community peace. Contact the HOA continuation team if you feel unsafe. Acting Liaison. P. Calhoun. The photo was blurry, but unmistakably Ellis sitting on his lawn chair outside the chained garage sipping iced tea. It was meant to shame him, intimidate, ostracize. But when I stepped onto my driveway and saw Idella March stooped wearing the same green visor she always did picking up the flyer, she didn't frown. She folded it neatly and placed it in her recycling bin without a word. Sometimes silence says more hey than shouting ever could. Ellis wasn't there to sell apple butter. He set up the tent at 8:04 a.m., right beside the caramel corn vendor and 2 spots down from the hay bale photo booth. It was a standard white pop-up canopy with no signs, no decorations, just a folding table and a box labeled Receipts. I arrived 10 minutes later with the mini projector and a long orange extension cord. The air smelled like kettle corn and fried dough. Kids were already darting around the pumpkin displays. No one paid attention to us. Not yet. Ellis wore his usual denim jacket. No expression. No small talk. He laid out the pamphlets printed on cheap stock paper, black and white stapled at the corner. What HOA is and isn't. Inside bullet points, excerpts from legal codes, a copy of the 2021 dissolution letter. At exactly 9:12 a.m., a Channel 14 news van rolled in beside the corn maze. I nudged Ellis. We might get company. He didn't look up. That's why we made copies. By 9:45, we had a modest crowd, retirees curious about the tent with no price tags. A few PTA moms, a city council member I recognized but couldn't name. I flipped on the projector and angled the tarp to give us shade. The first image, a cropped screenshot of Patrice's fake Rule 44B. Second, a PayPal transaction into an account labeled Calhoun Operations. Third, the HOA dissolution document signed by the county clerk. One woman whispered, "Wait, wasn't that rule on my violation letter last year?" I nodded. It was on mine, too. At 10:12, Patrice appeared. She wore a blazer, bold red with shoulder pads, and carried her infamous clipboard like a weapon. She scanned the crowd, smiled too wide, and walked straight up to our table. "Well," she said loud enough for the microphoneless crowd to hear, "someone's been busy." Ellis didn't answer. He handed another pamphlet to a woman in a Cubs hat. Patrice leaned toward me. "Is this your idea of civic engagement, Braden?" I replied calmly. "No, just truth, neatly formatted." She laughed, but it wobbled. Then her eyes caught the image on the projector behind us, her own email, time-stamped referencing emergency power renewal after the HOA had ceased to exist. She stepped back. Someone in the crowd held up a phone, then another, then 3. Lorelei arrived then from the side path near the food trucks. She wore jeans, no clipboard, and a button that read, Civic Truth. She nodded at me and walked around the table straight to the laptop. She clicked the next slide. A spreadsheet filled the screen dates, amounts, names. Every HOA donation that had landed in Patrice's private account over the past 14 months. Patrice's hand tightened on her clipboard. Those were discretionary assessments, she snapped. Approved by temporary board consent. Ellis finally spoke. Which board? Patrice opened her mouth, but the silence swallowed her answer. Then came the whisper, low, close, and not from any of us. A man in khakis and a windbreaker stepped beside her. He looked like someone's uncle, maybe a golf course regular, but he held a badge discreetly shown at waist level. He leaned in and said something only Patrice could hear. She blinked. The clipboard slipped from her fingers, hit the grass with a soft thunk. Lorelei closed the laptop. For a moment, no one moved. Then, someone in the back male voice, late 40s maybe, called out, "What about the fees we paid last year?" Another voice joined. "I got charged twice for the community garden." "Where'd that money go?" An older man stepped forward. "My wife got a violation letter for her hanging plant." That came from this fake rule too. I looked around and realized this was no longer a quiet dispute. This was a reckoning. Weldon was sitting on a hay bale near the cider stand. He didn't say a word, just watched. His leather notebook rested on his knee. Patrice stooped slowly to retrieve her clipboard. Her hand trembled. Not theatrical, real. Her eyes darted, scanning for an escape route that no longer existed. Behind her, someone had stuck a handmade banner onto the side of the tent. I hadn't seen it before. HOA equals community, not control. Ellis didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just continued handing out pamphlets. I looked up. The news van camera was now pointed at our table. No press release, no spin. Just receipts. They towed Patrice's BMW just after sunrise. A matte gray truck with a rusted winch and an engine that coughed more than it growled. The towman didn't say a word. He just latched the wheels, cranked the lever, and drove off like he'd done it 100 times before. Ellis didn't watch. He stayed in his garage sorting through socket wrenches like it was any other Tuesday. But Idella watched. From her porch. Arms crossed. That green visor still perched on her head. Her lips curled in something that resembled a smile but never quite made it all the way. By mid-morning, a new sign appeared on Patrice's front door. Federal property, do not trespass. It was affixed with 2 thick nails hammered at odd angles like someone didn't want it coming off too easily. A few feet away, her manicured flower beds had started to yellow. No more HOA citations for wild clover intrusion. No one to send them. That same morning, Lorelei forwarded me an email. Your interview for Community Oversight Officer is confirmed, November 3rd. She didn't gloat. Just asked if I had a decent blazer she could borrow. I said yes, but only if she promised not to pin one of her Civic Truth buttons on the lapel. We both laughed. First time in weeks. By Halloween, the air had shifted. Not just the temperature, though the first frost came early that year, whitening lawns and leaving crisp edges on fallen leaves, but something else. The hush of suspicion had lifted. People waved again. Kids rode bikes in packs. Ellis and I installed a new corkboard outside the mail hut. We titled it, Carindale Free Notice. No bylaws, no approvals. Just a few pushpins and space to share. Weldon sent over a printout of updated state registration info just in case anyone tried reviving the old HOA under a new name. I pinned it to the corner of the board, laminated and bolded. Lorelei, now walking with a spring in her step, spent her afternoons helping neighbors file reimbursement claims. I saw her seated at the diner showing Idella how to scan bank statements on her phone. The waitress brought extra lemon for their tea. And then Idella did something that silenced us all. She donated $2,000 from her personal savings money she'd once kept in a cookie tin under her sink to start a legal defense fund. Not for herself. for the families who'd been hit hardest by Patrice's fees. She didn't make a speech, just handed over a sealed envelope at the free notice board and walked away. The private property sign Ellis had made months ago, the one people used to snicker at, got remade. This time in polished walnut sanded to satin smoothness carved with a laser etching machine by one of the high school kids down the block. It wasn't hung beside Ellis's garage. It was mounted at the neighborhood's front entrance. Underneath it read, Carindale Crossing. Quiet on purpose. Someone stuck a single yellow mum beside the post. That night, I walked home from Ellis's hands deep in my jacket pockets. The frost crunched underfoot, and somewhere down the block a wind chime sang softly in the breeze. Inside my mailbox was a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address. But in the corner, faint initials in blue ink, PC. I didn't open it. Not right away. Sometimes justice speaks loud. Sometimes it whispers from a prison mailroom scrawled in cursive that used to sign fines. The BBQ wasn't on any official calendar. No HOA permit, no waiver, no clipboard patrol. That's probably why the ribs tasted like freedom smoked low and slow, rubbed with spices from 3 different households and passed around on mismatched paper plates. Ellis's backyard never looked better. Leaves drifted from the oak tree like lazy confetti. Someone had dragged a Bluetooth speaker out and queued up a playlist that spanned 4 decades. The grill hissed, the kids laughed, and someone's dog no leash wandered from group to group, collecting crusts and affection in equal measure. I stood near the fire pit watching Lorelei bounce between conversations. She didn't hold court. She just blended, nodded, laughed, but there was a quiet gratitude in every glance sent her way. One woman pressed her hand gently on Lorelei's forearm while thanking her for helping with a refund claim. Another slipped her a recipe card. I waited for a lull and handed her a sealed envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Letter of recommendation," I said. "For the job. You've got more community oversight in your fingernail than half the state." She tucked it into her coat pocket without opening it. "Thanks, Braden." We both looked over to where Ellis sat surrounded by 3 teenagers gesturing toward the garage with a barbecue fork like it was part of a legend. I swear to you he was saying there was a time when trains ran right past here. Big ugly things. Steam and clatter. You couldn't hear yourself think. One of the teens leaned in. "Like real trains," Ellis smirked. "You think I welded that lock shut just for fun, A kid I didn't recognize, maybe 10 or 11, approached me holding a folded sheet of paper. "You're the guy who used to make stuff fly, right?" I blinked. Sort of. He handed me the paper, a pencil sketch of a drone, boxy, awkward, full of passion. "I want to build this. My mom says you worked for a space place." I looked at the drawing. "It's got too many rotors." "Yeah," he said, "but it looks cool that way." I smiled. "That's the right reason." I kept the drawing, folded it carefully, slid it into my pocket like it mattered more than most emails I'd ever sent. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned gold, a new family lingered across the street. Dad, Mom, 1 kid. Just watching. The man raised a hand and called out to Ellis. "Hey, you the one they call the Lock Man." Ellis chuckled, stood up slow. "Depends who's asking." "No one bad," the guy said. "Just glad you're still here." Ellis raised his plastic cup in acknowledgement. Me too. There were no speeches, no formal thanks. Plates scraped clean jokes passed like heirloom stories interrupted halfway and never needing to be finished. I saw Weldon lean back in a lawn chair staring at the walnut sign mounted at the edge of the property. His notebook was open but untouched. The drone, the real one, not the sketch, buzzed overhead. A teenager piloted it carefully over the porch light and out toward the tree line. Ellis shaded his eyes. 5 more seconds, he muttered, and I'm climbing the roof. We laughed, because we knew he meant it, because the tension had lifted, because we could. As the crowd thinned and paper plates found their way into bins, I walked alone to the driveway. The golden hour painted everything soft and forgiving. Even the fence that once held back trespass felt ornamental. The sign was still there. Private property. No exceptions. Polished, centered, mounted in walnut. The sun caught its grain and made it glow. I didn't take a picture. Didn't need to. The sound of that afternoon of cicadas, of laughter, of neighbors exhaling would be enough to remember. Some victories don't shout. They just breathe. The scent of hickory smoke still clung to my jacket the next morning, and the sign by Ellis's fence caught the dawn, just right walnut dark letters, bold, no need for explanation. Funny how something once meant to keep people out now marked the place we all came back to. Justice. I've learned doesn't always wear a badge or arrive with sirens. Sometimes it's handwritten, signed in silence, and hung where folks can see it not to punish but to remember. What we protect says as much about us as what we let go. Maybe that's the real work of living, choosing each day what's worth defending and what deserves forgiveness. Have you ever rebuilt something or someone you thought was lost? I'd love to hear your story.